Welcome to a new era of the podcast. I have changed the direction a little bit. We're no longer called Champions of Marketing. We're now called Not Another Tech Bro Podcast. The reason I have changed direction was I wanted to expand the topics that I was talking about and the people that I was talking to. I was super excited for today's episode where I speak to Josh Miramant. He is the CEO and founder of Blue Orange Digital, which is a data science and machine learning agency with offices over in New York and also Washington, D.C. We talk about mainly topics related to the election today, polling, AI, machine learning, blockchain, voter suppression, voter fraud, some really interesting topical discussions given the situation that we're in right now with an election less than 2 weeks away. I hope you enjoy this podcast. If you have any feedback, feel free to leave a comment. To support the podcast, leave a like and make sure to subscribe on YouTube and also follow my company page, Not Another Tech Bro Podcast, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. Here's Josh. Thanks for joining. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we briefly spoke a week or so ago. Be telling all my friends like, hey, got this guy coming on. It's going to be really interesting. We're going to talk about the election, AI, machine learning. So how about we just start off if you want to tell us a bit about you, Josh, and your company.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just want to kick off and say it's been mutual. I've been very excited about chatting. And part of my background, which leads in nicely, is that I have a lot of interest in this topic area. So it's actually a couple different interests that converge for why this topic is so kind of applicable and a passion of mine. So just for background, I actually went to undergrad for political science, but I was heavily math focused and actually focused pretty heavily on polling analysis and the methodology and statistical modeling around polling. So that's actually just where I focused in my political science background, but talking about voting and that application converged with my profession, which I have been a lifelong software engineer turned data engineer. Actually worked and founded or was first employee at 2 venture-backed companies prior to starting my current engagement, which is Blue Orange Digital. We're just a digital agency that focuses on predictive analytics and machine learning. So I've been a hands-on keyboard data engineer for a better part of my career, and then moved into getting to apply really interesting prediction machines to help companies optimize their business. So it's the convergence of those two focuses and areas that bring this topic to front. That's been pretty exciting for me.
Cool. So we're at a point in history where it's no secret, 2020 has been a bit of a shit show. The next 2 weeks, we're looking at another debate. I'm going to be posting this on Thursday, so another debate tonight, the final debate, and then we've got the election on November 3rd. And there's a lot of stories coming out, and previously with the 2016 election, about foreign nations interfering in elections. And it's come up again. I've read a few articles in the past few weeks about the potential for Russia and China to interfere in elections. For people that have very limited knowledge about hacking, what it means, which is most Americans, and even myself, nowhere near the level that your experience can show when it comes to hacking and influencing elections. So for people that don't know what this all means, how is it even possible for a foreign nation to come in and influence an election?
Yeah, and it's a great question. There's actually a number of different areas. So I'm just going to kind of put the 2 buckets and break out a couple different areas that we can dive into. But if you think about the term influence, and I think hacking falls into that certainly as one of the subsets, but the idea of a foreign nation influencing our election, there is direct tampering, the idea that comes around of like, what is a voter fraud action, right? Something that somebody else was bad, ill intentions, and can mess with some systems. And there's a handful of ways that can be done. We'll flush those out in a minute. I just want to differentiate though, a lot of the media that was generated on the last cycle and where Russia got this and was proven to have tampered with our elections was really around manipulative influence through social media. And actually, both of those are pretty heavily rooted on machine learning for different cases where there's actual influence through them, but they are very distinct and relatively separate. So just jumping into the hacking, which is kind of like the boogeyman in the closet, the state of our United States elections is actually one of the, we always just like to use this term, it's called security through obscurity, where it's an incredibly fragmented system. So your local, your state runs the voting process, usually either a party or the state run, and then you run down to county and you have voting districts, and that's different by state. So just imagine a whole bunch of different entities. In each of those, each jurisdiction has a different methodology. There are some that are using voting machines, some use that print voting tablets, some that still tick them, some that write on paper. There's a whole bunch of different methodology. But and this is actually something that even in computer science, there's the premise of security through obscurity, in that it's very difficult to influence a full system on a hacking entry currently, because frankly, we just have a really like an old school arcane system. That's like, since we're so far behind technologically, it's very hard to go tamper at scale. And I think that it's going to be an important question. We can dive into this. It's going to change quickly as we start modernizing our voting process. The one area that we have seen is in the actual hacking or tampering system is on voting machines. And so there's a lot of push currently to have voting machines that print out paper verified audit trails as a system that's been established with pretty credible using about 30% of the states right now in some capacity, or 30% of the voting districts. So most of the states use them in some capacity, but they're used pretty widely. That is actually an area that there's been pretty easy proof that hacking the system and influencing those is actually pretty easy to do, really easy. Like there's hacking conferences that they're always put up, and you have that heroic story where they come in with this impressive new software update, no one can get through it. Rarely do they have that. Usually it's within a couple minutes, somebody's found a way in. This year it was just as quick as the year before, even with all their updates. Luckily, those are usually gapped machines in the sense that they store locally and produce paper for verification. And still very fragmented. It doesn't go into some central data store, and it's just a system for collecting and producing in different ways across that highly fragmented system. So the thesis currently is that hacking our election from the cliche guy behind a keyboard in Russia sitting in his basement, sorry to use the trope, is very difficult, if not impossible. And there's been pretty extensive analysis that's done retroactively to look at these, even when this has been used. There's a few cases like mail-in voting replacements, like people overseas been voting different ways that use fully online versions. And to be honest, it's actually quite rare. And we've seen very few occurrences, like single digits or 10, when there's a very large, when Duke University did a big study, they found 10 occurrences of voter fraud in any capacity, and only one of them had to do with electronic tampering, backed up again in the same 5-year span by a Washington Post study. So very little quote unquote hacking. There's other ways to do voter fraud, which is also incredibly low, statistically and significantly low. But that's kind of that first bucket of kind of a very scary entity. And I think we should circle back to this. I think that's going to change very quickly as we start unifying data. And it's one of the biggest things to be concerned about. But that entity is of kind of tampering with systems is pretty protected in that security through obscurity structure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's obviously a lot of technological change that's happened in the past 20 years. And I think one of the things that kind of snuck up on everyone is internet banking. And for some reason, the vast majority of the population around the world or in developed countries that have solid internet banking systems is that people are just okay with it. They're okay with not actually physically having access to all their cash. They're okay with just being able to use face recognition to get onto their internet banking and see however many thousands or millions of dollars they have in their account, and it's fine. And they don't understand the mechanics of how transferring money from one person to another works. They just accept that that's how it is. But when it comes to the potential of voting electronically, most people freak out about that. I don't understand how there's such a gap in people's level of comfort between those two topics.
This is one of the most inconsistent. I mean, there's many inconsistent human logics that you apply. This one ranks up the top when you think about tech concern to me. So let's lay this out here. We in the United States have something like 1.7 trillion US dollars of currency not in circulation, printed. That's it, right? We have a $14 trillion debt, a $30 trillion GDP. Like you can just put these numbers. So where's the rest of that money? The rest of that money is sitting on numbers on a computer screen. That's literally how the Fed distributes it. That's where our bank account. And so this point where we, since the 80s, have been comfortable with our money not existing in any form except for numbers on a computer screen. And frankly, we don't have any idea any more than our banking accounts how we log into an iPhone. Like there's just comfort that it works, right? But most of our net worth is tied up in this. And so there's this amazing thing. You look at even developing countries, and I think Brazil's jumped pretty hard, but you look at where Brazil was 10, 15 years ago, they have this incredible text message money transfer system instantly. And so all of this currency actually exists where they'll buy a pack of gum on credit. They literally have our credit card usage is done through text messaging, and they can do it in a touch of a phone. And that's unilateral across their entire country. That's just the way of currency. There is very little. They solve that to reduce the troubles with inflation control over printed currency. It was getting so invariable. That was the solution. So to your point, it's incredibly confusing why people are so, there's challenges to overcome in technology when you start bulk grouping data together. You still need to think about decentralization as a major concern to overcome, which is a difference between money storage, where it's set and apart and insured, versus voting, which is the concept of it is to unify. But despite that, it doesn't, the fear tactic that's been emerged about data unification and even how security has been set, to be frank, it's a very confusing part. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's very inconsistent. So, but yeah, I think I'll address that. The only thing I would also say around how that's important to keep note, though, with financial services in general, like our money existing in a completely electronic form, there is a accepted level of fraud that just happens there. There's a percentage, a pretty reasonable, anywhere depending how effective and sized the organization, the larger, usually less. It's counterintuitive, but the data is better to stop it, and the investment's better to stop it. But the fraud is pretty rampant in those, and that's just cost of doing business. That's part of the package they're offering you is FDIC insurance, and if fraud occurs, that will reimburse you, that this number is not going to be wrong. That's kind of the service offering of financial services institutions. And there's many organizations that back your data all day long that don't offer that and don't have a requirement to. So there are some, social political requirements that would have to exist for voting to move in that direction, but the innate distrust of digital storage of information, it's just inconsistent. It's not realistic. We need to get over that comfortably to kind of move forward on these next versions of where we'll go with the voting process.
Mm-hmm. The next topic that I wanted to touch on is polling. So right now, Joe Biden has a pretty healthy lead across all the major polls, and looking at the CNN polar polls, he's up. And a lot of people are saying, well, Hillary was up in 2016 and she still lost. The question I have to you is, what's different 4 years later in terms of the technology behind these polls? And is there any type of technology, whether it be AI or ML, that is helping create more accurate polls this time around?
Yeah, great questions. I think there are, the short answer is there's better technology than ever before for doing the statistical analysis. And, you see 538, a lot of these, that was Nate Silver, and his claim to fame was applying data science to poll analysis. And I think that a lot of the methodologies he was using were the best that could be, and he being that entity of data scientists applied in the space, were the best that existed. And I think what the current big limitations are two factors. Data reporting is inherently bad in how you ask a question, and reporting in general of information, which is the foundation of all polling, is an incredibly problematic way of going about it. So what the interesting thing, and this is where the machine learning solution starts getting more effective, is if you think about this idea of what Facebook has for data on us, without asking somebody, you would have a far more accurate predicted outcome of a polling result, if you were to think about on two factors, you could even predict likelihood of a person making it to the polls once you start seeing certain trends and doing that analysis. When you have that much, behavioral or human behavioral data being stored, that's what's so fascinating about that data set. The level of correlation parameters, which are the things that a model will use to correlate to an outcome, those parameters become really there are many and very accurate predictors. You can get very accurate on the layer that you drill in on. And I think that the area of where we will move to improve is actually not using self-reporting. Reporting is just an inherently flawed methodology. And as much as any of those a poll, which is everything that we look at and see, there's an inherent risk of a pretty large margin of error. And we even saw where, the margin of error, it's counterintuitive for us to interpret statistics accurately. Like if it's a 10% likelihood of occurrence, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that can still 100% of the time, 100% of the time occur, right? If it's a Boolean outcome, and that's hard for us to understand. So, even 1%, if we have Trump gets reelected and he has 1% likelihood of it happening, that's still the full outcome. And that's statistically probabilistic. And that's the answer where it's that was one factor in people not understanding. But then I also think the methodology of polling is foundationally flawed. And there's only so good you can get on garbage in, garbage out data, which is the scenario here. So the short answer is, I don't think polling has vastly improved since last time along. There isn't any major statistical improvement that can be applied to bad data. Is there better ways out there? Yes, it just sits inside. And this gets to this concept that we're actually facing and is becoming a major conversation right now is who owns data? Who owns your data? This is something that Facebook sits on predominantly. They have the most behavioral individualistic data that probably could get really accurate polling information. But now that's just a byproduct that's not aligned with a business model they have that they're sitting on. And is that, a reasonable thing for this information to sit there so we can have influence on it? And, their just choice not to do anything with it is why we either are or not impacted by the outcome of that polling information.
So it's very possible that a group of data scientists from Facebook could get together at this point, run some analysis, and probably with a pretty high level of confidence determine who the winner is going to be, just on demographics, posting information, likes, shares, all that type of stuff. They could most likely
get the most accurate results of I would say they have the most foundationally accurate ability to predict that outcome. They would have the lowest margin for error, and the likelihood of their prediction being correct would become statistically significant for accurate. So those two ways. And the thing that takes a step back, so it's fascinating around polling though, but there are hundreds of different incredibly impactful outcomes you could have by that same thesis could be proven true. Health predictors. And this is a really interesting sector that's come out that you'd have, so I'm just running down ideas like health predictors, voting, they're focusing on what you're buying, and they're incredibly effective. They've pretty much, along with Google, eaten up all ad dollars because of the efficacy that they're proving around influence your behavior on purchase. And I think this is being spoken about quite loudly with Tristan Harris, and he was an ex-Googler, and he actually has a great documentary on Netflix right now that is, I'm just blanking on the name of it. It's called Social Dilemma. And it just talks a lot around this topic. Fascinating, well worth your listeners to read, but it dives in pretty deep here. But he runs the Center for Humane Technology. And the premise there is he was at Google and they were working on the Gmail product, and they were just deciding about notifications. When does it come? And no one was thinking about the fact that any decision that made in that room of a handful of people, 2 billion people the next day or the next release would ultimately be impacted by the decision, whether it was something that was a push by default or was a SMS or so whatever layer of notification was inside of that room would completely change the work habit, the life habit of all these people, whether you wanted it or not. We could choose to turn it off. That was a few percentage of people. So coming back to the voting question you have, not only could you hypothetically do prediction based on it and the best accuracy that you could have, you could also do prescription, and the idea you could say this factor causes this outcome. And that's the issue that becomes the ethics around why Facebook has announced they're not running political ads for the week before elections. That's because they don't want to be in the position of saying, wow, we're hyper targeting something we've uncovered that completely is that trigger factor for changing somebody's opinion 100% of the time. And we're selling that. That feels, the level of, vying for attention to manipulation is a gray area that they have the power to choose where you kind of interject that execution. And I think that's the concerning factor where people are waking up and saying, this free product of Facebook actually isn't the product. The users are the product. If it's free, you have to see where the value is. Our user provided data to sell to the advertisers is the thing Facebook is monetizing, and they sit on that control. And listen, I'm an avid tech user. I am not tinfoil hats here. I have a Facebook account since 2014. I'm early, it's like the early days of collecting data on me. So it's not like I'm sitting here shunning it, but I think the idea of we now are faced with a question, and something like polling is a really important factor. If you know that you're going to get a wash, the current party doesn't show up. And that's a tactic that was employed in Russia. And actually one of the more common, one of the shown machine learning applied retroactive statistical analyses that were done on campaigns was done in 2011 in a presidential for Vladimir Putin in Russia, in the Russian Federation. And they could show where they provided misinformation and the suppression of voter turnout with direct correlation. They had a whole bunch of interesting findings for this big release data set, but they used machine learning to look at statistically likely predictive correlation. They put the margin of error, and they showed when a advertisement were on the radio and it depressed or suppressed voter turnout for that factor. So these are the types of actual applications where you think of the spectrum of machine learning having influence. Prediction's the starting point. It's this spectrum up to prescription where you make influence, where you make impact. That's the saying, the idea, do this and this is then the outcome. And we're at that stage. We are doing that currently. That's why ads are so valuable, is because they put that in front of the people that make the action they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a huge area of discussion regarding the psychological factor of large polling leads, meaning that if I'm a potential Democrat voter and I see a large lead for Joe Biden, I might think, I probably don't need to vote. Looks like he's going to win anyway. And there's historical examples, right, in Mexico, where there was some voter fraud, where they were updating the information of live election results to suppress certain voters. I think Argentina has some history.
Argentina had and they had a lot of data on it as well too, because Argentina, they had a bunch of fraud. So you see the cases in retrospect where there's a bunch of fraud, and there's actually an amazing toolkit that's been released. It's a statistical modeling toolkit that they allowed academia to come in and say let's analyze this together. And this is where a lot of these things were uncovered. But Argentina and Mexico, there was a really big effort in there's Portugal, where there was an EU effort that they did on that front. Same thing, where they were seeing this start to do really controlled, the thing that you're always thinking about, just to take a step back of how you kind of approach these data problems, is you need a statistically consistent training data set or a comparison data set. So that's what you're looking at when you get these big areas. You can go do analysis and go look in the underlying data and see where there's areas with low fraud or kind of the normalized data output. And then you can start to find these interesting anomalies. And that's really how fraud action works. And then when the next layer is understanding where the anomalies come from. And the perfect example you just provided is, once you've uncovered that anomaly, just the description layer, what is the reason for it, actually becomes fascinating. And you're actually backing in, and this is an interesting piece. I was just talking to one of my data scientists about this yesterday, is it's really a reverse model to avoid bias in every way. If you think about bias, you come in with an assumption, even if it's not cognizant, it's not a conscious bias, but you come in with some understanding, your business case. This is what happens all the time at work, where it's we want to prove that this thing is a good thing or a bad thing. That's a bias. You have a layer of you understand the business context. what you're explaining here, and this is fascinating, how you do forensic, forensic anything, anomaly, forensic fraud, forensic polling analysis, all of these pieces where you're drilling in, is you say, let's just find the anomaly. So how do we normalize this data first, and then isolate the deviation between each anomaly so that we can group them, and then we go find correlations in the human reason why. And that's how you actually have backed in on the study here for finding these types of examples. Like, perfect example of finding voter suppression just based on, a radio playing. You can see literally within the range of voting districts where there's a radio tower that has impact of it, and you see where it gets fuzzy, that it stops. And that's the type of stuff that you can kind of, when you're doing these analyses that are kind of, sort of surface, it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. If I'm part of a campaign team for either the Republicans or the Democrats, and I want to run some social media ads on Instagram or Facebook, do I have the same level of access to audiences and segmentation as just a private or publicly traded company that is, for profit?
Yeah. So it is a pretty even playing field from that front. I think that so Facebook has done a pretty reasonable job giving, commoditizing, hyper-targeted, and Google too, but it's just a different platform. There's a more intent action around that, so you're not as manipulative in it, I guess I would say. But I would say that Facebook has made it, that's their product, because they actually don't care where their money, they do. Let's be clear. They want to be profitable so they don't get ire of the public. But to be fair, they're not trying, there's a reason why they don't want to be considered this big debate of whether they're a publisher or not, is they don't want to be picking content that's good or bad, because that's just a bad business for them. Then they're in the face of, they're going to piss off a bunch of people. The other side's going to not want to invest, or you're starting to have companies that don't want to be advertising because you can just play that game forward in this day. It's pretty polarizing.
The question was around the ability to access the same type of segmentation and demographics. If I want to advertise, if I'm just a company trying to sell a product and I want to advertise lacrosse balls, do I have the same access to data as the Republican Party or the Democratic Party to advertise for the election and try to influence who's voting for who?
Yeah, and it's a great question, but I think, so yes, again, the platform is an equal playing field. Like it's pretty even. There's no favors being picked. The thing that is becoming more important than just the platform itself is what is being put into there. And I think that's what we're seeing. If you really want to think about the most important discovery that was publicized by the Russian influence on our election, is just how effective, this is now something that you have to get in impression marketing, but we can talk to that in a moment, but just how effective in being inflammatory is. So if you put up something that stirs you up against something, that is incredibly effective at a rate that good information doesn't convey as well. And so the classic thing, it's like it takes seconds to spread a lie and hours or days to correct it, or for the truth to spread, that type of parable. That's what we're faced with here. And what's interesting beyond that, though, is that we're getting to a point where there is both, we have actually data on performance now. So this is this YouTube scenario that's occurring where there's some really interesting reporting going on, and we don't have really structural data for saying it's this effective, but the rabbit hole construct that exists in YouTube where you get recommended content. Think about the YouTube recommender. It's an incredibly sophisticated, one of the most sophisticated pieces of ML that exist. Is not only, think about what this model's doing. You are going in to watch a cooking video, and it recommends things on the side, and it needs to know a bunch about you, and it has a ton about you because of all the information you fed to Google from your Android phone, from your search results, from your email. All of it is being pulled in there. It's disaggregated, but it's being pulled in to inform this model. It's not saying, you specifically, Chris, but it's talking in aggregate. So it knows that. It also knows everything about a video. When there's drop off, how likely you are to retain to the end, how profitable is it offensive? It knows that as well. And then there's this interesting thing that no real human knows, but this machine is incredibly effective at guessing, is which one that you may have no relationship, but if it puts it up based on the image on the front and the content in there that you click, that will get you on that site for that 10-minute food cooking show for the next 5 hours. And that is not an exaggeration. It's 5, 8, 10 hours of efficacy that model is just turning it up to 11. And I think that's the interesting thing when you say, what's different about it actually isn't the playing field of can we hyper target effectively. I think the thing that's interesting is how effective are we getting at inflaming and polarizing and that type of cycle. That's the thing that's becoming new. That's where data is becoming weaponized against us semi-unintentionally, or at least haphazardly. We don't, the intent of Facebook and YouTube is to keep you on them longer. It's not in itself a bad thing. You're clicking, you're driving an action, but it's actually not your decision. You are now playing against a supercomputer that is so effective that the only thing it's designed to do is to subvert your own decision. It makes it feel like it's your own, but it's to subvert and control. So what if that autoplay video that clicks up and inflames you about a political campaign that hyper targets one day before the election and has a 70% correlation to switch a vote, or even just to make you not turn out? That's what stuff is changing. So the platform is becoming, though important for data collection, becoming less important. It's the efficacy of data that no human is making a decision on that's making a major impact on how people are making decisions now.
Yeah, that reminds me of in The Social Dilemma, where they have the skit of the three guys in the control room, trying to work out like, what do we do next? How do we get him back on the platform? I myself, I deactivated Facebook and I hadn't used it in quite a long time. I don't have Instagram anymore. I don't have Snapchat anymore. I don't have Twitter. But I do get stuck in YouTube rabbit holes. But I like it. Like generally what I subscribe to and the videos that come up are because of ones that I have initially chosen to watch. Every now and then there's a weird one in there. So I don't feel like YouTube is as sinister. It's like you've got to show some kind of intent to then get into that rabbit hole. Like if I start watching Steven Crowder change my mind videos,
right,
then like that's all I get for about 3 days. But then if I don't click on them, they kind of go away, which has happened.
No, I'm a same demographic male. I'm going to get Steven Crowder videos, and they're happening. Like you can't. That's like, yeah, I get the recommendation. The one thing that I would say on this, and so just for context and bridging for you and your listeners, like I too have taken this information. I'm not on Instagram. I don't use Facebook. It's an entity that's up there, but like I am concerned about any drug that I don't feel I have a lot of control over. I don't actually understand this enough, and the pros haven't outweighed the cons. It's hard to get off of a bit. Like I do actually I felt the addiction on transition. I remember, just like mindlessly scrolling, like, on the bathroom, messing around on Facebook. Like that was like, okay, I'm bored now. What am I doing? I didn't realize that when I phased out. The one thing that I feel like just being more aware of this piece, and it's, you are, so you might, fall outside the fray of the statistical consistency too, is not so much the obvious videos that are recommended on YouTube. It's the less ones like that are kind of like it. And then like that 3 deep, that's the efficacy of it though. It's when you, even being aware of it, if it can keep engaging, it's really effective if you have no cognizance of this and you just see a really well-placed icon. But if you go watch, some of the behind the scene videos of how the model, like the characteristics that you see consistently around why some of the videos on YouTube that get 50, 60 million views with nobody subscribing to them. They have big followers, like 8 million followers, but then get 50 million views consistently. The ex-NASA Rob, I'm blanking his name, but he has like 5 million views and every gets 40 million. It's these perfectly modeled algorithmic clips that go through, and I'm sure we've both seen them, but neither of us are subscribed. That's the more insidious stuff. I didn't realize, because I see the ones that you're like, oh man, YouTube algorithm, good try, no way. But that's the stuff that's actually more effective, where I realized, watch the videos in reference, I'm not subscribed to them, and I have no recollection how I ended up there, because I'm the same thing with YouTube. And I'm like, okay, that did happen. And I just like, what about the 2 seconds of ads that play before that actually are more effective at influencing than you think? That's the stuff that you're playing against an AI supercomputer of this game, and it's actually in play. It has influence. It's effective, and it's deployed, and it's an interesting piece to play with.
It's not uncommon to go into the comment section of a video that has like 10 plus million views, and you'll just see someone say, anyone else get this recommended to them? Like, I have no interest in this. Is like 10,000 likes on it. So, that goes to show
the random Rex. Yeah,
exactly. So what the thing I want to finish on here, Josh, is mail-in voting, digital voting. Right now, an article that I was reading just earlier today said that digital voting it's an academic research topic right now, and we probably will get there, but maybe it's going to be 10 years. There's technology like blockchain technology. There's probably other things coming around the corner that I'm not even aware of. You might be, you might not be. Like, are we still going to be using paper ballots in 10 years from now just because of the insidious nature of politics and the need to influence and hack? Or do you think that there is a day that we can have a secure app-based environment with a click of a button, and we get to vote for who we want to lead the country and do it in a safe way?
Yeah. So my opinion on this, and just, I think first off, the read of the space is right. Like, we do have blockchain backed digital voting currently in play right now in, I think, 5 states, mostly around like military overseas voting. So it's very narrowly applied. And again, in the concept of security through obscurity, when it's very small applied, it doesn't have much risk. But let's come back to that. I think you have to back up. It's a when, not if problem. There is the inherent risk that will occur by staying incredibly legacy legacy systems is only going to become more insidious. And you think about, like, we already have low voter turnout is a perfect example, especially youth voter turnout, where there's a new expectation of technology. Like, you see international numbers, you're looking at 70, 80% voter turnout, on a presidential year, let alone midterm, but presidential year, for comparison, is 60% on aggregate. 20 to 30 year olds, it goes down to like 20%. That's the range that we're talking. Wow. 20 to 30% on average, depending on who the candidate is and how the framing of it. So you're talking about the people, the digital natives, as they were, the legacy term of digital natives as we all came up, but that term, I think there's lower expectations. The high voter turnout is people that are used to the same old thing. But the idea where, when our system breaks so much in the sense it's ineffective, not even if it's just not working, say paper ballots are great, but it breaks in the concept that a dependency of democracy requires that we actually participate, but there's too high of a friction, we're going to be forced there. So correct, there are some inherent risks for centralizing your data. You move away from the security through obscurity scenario. And so instead of having a fully decentralized protection from decentralization, you have one entity, and there's huge incentive to go after that one entity. If you are Russia, the level has never been higher to go after one single entity, which is the US voting demographic. Right now, going after, Dade County doesn't really have the sexy appeal of spending the same amount of resources to hack that system, and it could take just the same amount of resources. So inherently, that shifts the game. But is that a reason to deter? I mean, you posed the question perfectly. Do you not put your money into a bank account because it's going to be a number on a digital screen? No, that's not the case. So it is a when, not if scenario. The best technology that we have that prior to this existence, I would say would be risky, is blockchain right now. It is incredibly foundational good technology. There is risk of having fully public record of voting forever, which conceptually is, troves and troves of data. You can't really get rid of a decentralized storage. So that's the academia of it. Like, how do you solve this? There are companies currently backing on blockchain, that are trying to solve it. I don't have a good answer for it. Does anybody? Like, these are real problems. That we've seen cryptocurrencies. We've seen Bitcoin get hacked. We've seen it fork that protects it. Somebody's going to hack it again. I think it's important to note that there's a concept in technology or tech security or IT security that's called the black white hat equilibrium, which is this concept where you have bad doers and bad actors and good actors, the black hat and white hat respectively. There's this concept that they stay relatively in order with each other. There's a balance between it, not by design. It's just the way of the universe. Whatever you want to attribute this to, it's that when a new piece of technology comes out, there's people trying to do malicious things with it, and people that do well with it relatively stay in equilibrium, or else we wouldn't have a thing called encryption. It wouldn't exist. If black hat got so far ahead, you would be able to hack encryption, vice versa. So the white hats would make it so secure that fraud would go away. So there's this equilibrium. We're kind of chasing the new technology here. And I think that's the solace, or that, whatever comfort we're going to have to take will rest in two things. One, that's been the way of technology forever. That's just the nature of things. The same reason why we're able to store, why we're able to do anything online is that things just get better in a precipitous manner. When quantum computer comes out, the proposed computing power that would be behind that could break our strongest encryption via brute force in seconds or less, nanoseconds. It would be so quick for it to try that in the theory, but it would also make more powerful encryption. So that's the layer up. The other thing that has to be blended there is just the same type of comfort that we get by knowing we have money in a bank account, like that same level. It's much more of a psychological transition that's going to happen as well. I mean, that's the thing that we're dealing with here, is those two things will have to be in parallel. And when you say 10 years out, that latter is far more likely to take 10 years than the geometric or the logarithmic curve that we are applying with technological advancement. So I think that's the play to come to here, is technology is not the issue for the delay for adoption of better voting tech. Frankly, there are some things to solve that we don't have perfect solutions for, but we have technology that is proven to be strong. I think the real thing that's going to be challenges people getting comfortable with it. And that's challenging, but sorry, my microphone just dropped again.
Yep, we'll got you back.
Okay, well, I'll keep going. All right, so as soon as we start having the really low voter turnout, so the whole system's broken, even in its decentralized form, we'll have to come up with something quickly. And I think that's going to be the more driving factor, will be when things are just stopping working in that scenario. So I think that's the way I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, it's super informative discussion. Again, really, thank you so much for joining and talking about this. It's such a huge time for not just Americans, but the rest of the world, just given America's political positioning and power. So I think there's a lot of other countries that are very much focused on the next 2 weeks and what's going to happen. I think that a lot of people listening to this, it's going to open their eyes as to what the future of technology is going to do to political systems and voting. If anyone wants to reach out to you, Josh, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, I'm, directly, you can reach me at contact@blueorange.digital. That comes right into me, or josh@blueorange.digital. And my company is blueorange.digital. So learn about a lot of this stuff and a lot of interesting writing on our blog around interesting machine learning and predictive analytics and a lot of this technology in production. So.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Josh. Well, I will definitely reach out to you post-election, and would love to get your thoughts just offline about how it all went.
Absolutely. There's no shortage of ideas on time I spent thinking about politics and lamenting the data and all these pieces. So I'd love to chat more.
Sweet. Thanks for joining, Josh. Have a good one.
Take care, Chris.